Welcome to This Old App, a podcast about learning, coding, smashing stuff together, breaking things apart, startups, failing, winning, and any other buzzwords we can think of.
Hey, Don. This week on This Old App, I want to talk. So, people that may listen to CTO Think and This Old App know that I was going through an interview process as I moved to a new city, Kansas City. And I don't want to belabor the interviewing stuff anymore. It's been interesting, learned a lot. But one thing that I found interesting was the kind of technologies that people are wanting to hire me for or talking to me about. So I kind of wanted to discuss some of those things I learned. Again, we're not going to name any companies. There's really no reason to do that. And I want to keep that stuff confidential. So we're going to talk on an abstract level.
Sure.
But by far, across 30 or 40 different people, recruiters, and companies I spoke to over the last 2 to 3 weeks, React is in full force, but beyond any other technology I talked to anyone about. It is
Right.
Now, some of that is a product of the fact that I have React on my profiles and resumes and stuff. But of any technology I have on my resume, and I've got a pretty fat number of tech, React is by far the one technology that more people talk to me about, completely across the board. And so I guess we can talk a little bit about that in the sense of why is React so dang popular versus the other single page app stacks.
Yeah,
Because it's
that sounds good.
Yeah. I'll start with an example because you don't have React in your stuff, right?
I've dabbled in it, but we don't have it. We don't have it at Aspire ED. Actually, I think we just added a piece to it, so we're slowly adding it in.
And you may have it soon if you switched to the stuff we did with Chasms for the CRUD. So you that code is still there, by the way. But it's interesting because I'll give you the example of one company that spoke to me. They said straight up, we're at the beginning of a project, and we are using React and Redux. And at the stage of interviews, I'm not really able to challenge people as to why. I can't really go, why are you using that in the first place? Because it's such a bad tone for the interview. But the interesting thing is that is they're not going to use Ember, they're not going to use Angular, they're not going to use Vue. And in fact, I only spoke to one company that has embraced Vue across all of their front end tech.
Sure.
They had Ember before, and now they're using Vue, and they love it. And so we had a discussion about why I like it. And it was interesting that they were, I guess, their attitude was React was a steeper learning curve for their people. And Vue fit right in where they liked Angular, but they didn't trust it anymore. So Vue kind of represented this fork that gives you both React and Angular. That was their opinion. But going back to the other company, they chose React and Redux. And I don't know why. Like they didn't discuss it, but they seemed very set on having chosen React and Redux without having a React person on the team. And that's what I found really interesting.
That is really interesting. So there's a couple things to parse there. So one,
Yeah.
And obviously you didn't get probably into it, but if they chose React and Redux, and I want to get back to Redux in a second. If they chose React and Redux without having, how did they arrive at that conclusion? Is the first question I'd have. So that's interesting.
My hypothesis is if you can tell me why certain kids in high school are popular versus others, you'll find out that why React is winning the choice before developer answer.
Sure.
That's all I can think of.
Huh.
And because I think it's about reading articles online, listening to podcasts, hearing the name a lot. And, Facebook is a monster of a promotion engine, and they're promoting an open source project that they support.
Sure.
And around that popularity becomes all the startups talk about it. And so then if you go to any type of startup venture or talk to anyone in the incubators, they're flocking to all the same direction. They're all listening to the same fiddler. And now let me say, I like React. Like, I'm not dissing React at all. I have yet to use Vue for a production level project for anyone. So I've done React about 3 or 4 times, and frankly, it works great. It's fast, does what I need, and I feel like it's fairly easy to maintain at the time I'm building something. What's really dangerous, I think, is how fast it's moving, where the people in charge, Abramov, another guy named Clark, last name Clark, I think. I feel like their team doesn't understand the need to let some things bake for a while. And they've already introduced a new thing called hooks.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't even want to, I don't want to think about it. Like, I want the community to like settle down on a piece of the technology or on a convention to build stuff with the technology before they introduce these hooks or this new approach like hooks that I'm like, does this really move the needle for what people need to learn and do? And that's where I feel things are unstable, because when I'm talking to a different company and they have an old version of a React build. We're talking like a year and a half ago. So it's ancient.
Sure.
And they're like, we want to update everything to use the conventions that are being touted now. We want to get the packages up to date. We want to follow use context instead of Redux. We want to use render props for different techniques. And I'm thinking to myself, why do you feel the need? It's one thing to say I want to upgrade the packages, because the packages are security risk if you don't update.
Right.
But when you say to me that you want to use render props for, you want to start using those, but you don't actually know what they are. You just know that someone's been touting them from the React team. I'm like, whoa, that's a problem. Because you're essentially saying, I want to use a new hammer just because someone says that hammer's better. But I'm like, you got the same nails, and I bet the hammers are just fine as you got right now. So, yeah, it's been interesting, the various, and this goes from startups to mature companies.
Sure.
Their buy into React and listening to the React team and their advice is amazingly loyal. People have kind of sunk their teeth into it. And I'm not saying it's not good to do it. It's just more of, I've never seen any particular framework get this much buy-in across the various maturity levels of companies. Because I used to think that only startups thought like this. And you would still have companies that are set up with Ember for years, and they'd be like, that's fine, we don't need to switch to a new thing. But I think React has changed the game. I think it's made older companies less prone to risky choices, basically buy in, and without the same level of diligence that they used to do with other frameworks.
Yeah, there's a couple things in there. So one, why is it so popular? And then the other thing I wanted to pick at a little was your statement that the React community and the React leads themselves change React so frequently. And is that, in my mind, what that brought up is that a byproduct of the instant on demand culture that exists now, as opposed to your older languages, which they'd release smaller versions over a year period of time, and release major releases only every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's feeding that attention cycle. I don't know. I doubt it's intentional, but I do wonder if it's just part of the popularity, is that they are adding things so frequently and changing things so frequently that it keeps everybody's attention on it.
Yeah.
And if your attention is on it, that tends to make it more popular, or at least more noteworthy. So I do think that's a part of it as well.
So I'm gonna actually argue against myself here and give an example of some. So my answer to you is I think it's a product of React has been set up. The ecosystem has been set up to be flexible and extensible, and the team leads are finding new ways to do things at a rapid pace, and they are cool with they're younger, and they are able to build in these new things fast, introduce them to the community fast, and the community is embracing it quickly. And when you have all that working together, they say, why wouldn't we do this? This is cool. This is the way that development should be. And if you look at a different stack or a different framework, Node, and its history, you can see there was an instance in the Node community that almost fractured the entire thing. And it was because I think Joyent was the company that kind of was the supporter, owner of the repo, maintainer company. And there were a number of key development leaders. I think they had a board. They had a board of people that was largely Joyent or cronies of theirs. And there was a development part of the community that said, we want to keep upgrading Node at a pace that is much faster than what you dinosaurs are willing to do. And the dinosaurs are like, well, we're in charge and we'll do it when we feel like it. And we have to support a lot of stuff. So we're not going to move at the pace you want. And so the development community said, we're going to fork it, and we're going to start going off on our own path. So then we got, I think it was IO.js was the fork of Node. Sure. And that lasted about 2 to 3 months, maybe a little longer, before finally, I mean, they started, like, IO just started going crazy with updates and moving at a pace that the Node folks got scared, because they were actually good features and good updates. It wasn't crazy type of features that were like, no one will want this. It was more like, yeah, we've just lost our core development team. We're not funding enough development ourselves to move forward. And it became a big risk for the maintainers of Node. So eventually they came back. And I think there's a lot of people, if you got back on board with Node in the last 2 years, you probably have no idea this ever happened, because it was a rather quick and as a bump in the road in the history of Node, essentially. But my point is that when I go and talk about React's moving too fast, I think the argument could be made that the React people say, look, if we don't rapidly innovate at this pace, we have the risk that something like Preact or any of these other React clones are actually going to be a problem, and that they could be a big risk for us. So I can see both sides of the argument, but I still feel that I feel like the community is the React community has no idea what tools it should be using for which problems. Right. I just don't feel like the communication from the top down is good enough at this point to teach the community what they should be doing. Maybe they don't feel it's their responsibility. I can understand that, but it's one of those things where the stewards are moving at a pace faster than I think the business community is prepared to respond or adjust.
Well, and let's take a very specific example to get back to where I wanted to get back to, and that's Redux. React came out and did its thing, and then Redux came in. I believe that's the piece Dan Abramoff brought in, with the time machine and all that as well. It was a whole big piece of it. And what you had everybody doing was going, oh, now instead of just using React, I'll use React and Redux. And they were using to butcher a quote from Jurassic Park. They were so preoccupied with whether they could use React that they didn't stop to think if they should. And of course, I blew it. But what you ended up finding out was people were building in Redux and pulling in this huge library of Redux and not really using it for what it was for. And so I think that's one of the problems that the rapid pace of change and the rapid pace of attention causes is everybody going, oh, what's the new React thing? Oh, let me go use it whether I need to or not. Yeah. And again, I'm not anti-React at all. We you and I had Greg Pollack on CTO Think a couple months ago, talking about his view and his involvement with it with Vue, and I've gone back and forth between React and Vue in the little bit I've messed with each. I started on React as most people did, and then found Vue, and I found Vue on the surface to be a little bit better. But as I dove in further and tried to build things, I found the words escaping me at the moment, but the way that you
the directives
the two-way the directives within Vue felt so much like when I was trying to use Angular. And I didn't like that either. It just felt funky. Whereas I was much more comfortable with JSX, which is the part of React that people get allergic to as well. I didn't have as an allergic reaction to JSX as I did to directives.
Oh, and I did an interview with someone, and they told me point blank they loved Vue for the two-way binding that directives gave you, and they hate JSX. they can never get around to
Yeah.
it. So it's this huge divide in opinions because this person was exactly the opposite of you.
Right.
I guess I'm in the middle because I don't care. JSX works for me. View templates work for me. What I do have a problem with is the overuse of Redux.
Right.
So I agree with you 100% there on the use of that particular.
And now that's starting to go away, right?
Feels like
Now
it, yeah.
we've had a at least 6 months, if not a year, of people going, "Whoa, you probably don't need Redux when you think you do."
Yeah.
That they finally started to turn that ship to get people away from Redux and more to just use React. And when you need Redux, then pull it in. But double check that you need it first because we've got all these newfangled features to work with.
Well,
Now, the funny thing is, and I'll just go over this quick story and then I'll throw it back to you real quick. One of the reasons that I moved from being a day-to-day programmer into management, and this would have been probably 1997-ish, 1998-ish. When I was at IBM, I had the opportunity to stay as a programmer or to move into project management. And I went ahead and chose project management because at the time I was concerned about the pace of change. And if I thought the pace of change was high in 98 compared to today, today is probably at least 10 times, if not 100 times more that things are changing rapidly. I actually like it now more that things are changing. It's very interesting to keep up on all the new things as long as it doesn't impact my day-to-day livelihood, I guess is the best way to put it.
but I mean, I'm living through the benefits of change. Like I'm getting these interviews because I'm able to employ technologies that businesses feel that they're stuck in a rut where they can't keep up, and they hire me to make sure they keep up. But what I really want to tell people is quit trying to be cool. Like quit this crap of trying to keep up with the new cool stuff. Yes, you're going to lose some developers who want to try the new things, but what you want is software that works and software that's maintainable. And you can definitely get yourself in a situation of trying to do the bleeding edge and being, even with the best developers, and finding yourself with software that is not maintainable and not working very well. You need to find a balance, and you need to say, you know what? React came out with hooks. Great. Let's see what they do in a year with that thing. Right. Because React has released and killed their own tools before. Mixin's got shelved. React Router has updated it. So, like, they won't even take responsibility for their own router. And so that thing's changed 4 times in the last 6 years, maybe. Right. Redux is one of those things that has evolved. And then you've got probably 3 other state management solutions that you can choose from. It's like, I just want to tell these folks, like, I know you feel the need after watching a video of someone acting like they know what they're talking about, but people need to be more discerning, they need to research and investigate these tools for their purposes, for their scenario, way more than they're doing. Because the problem, like you said, with Redux is if you talk to Abramoff about forms, like, people are mapping every single event in a view to Redux. And that is a lot of events that you're probably tracking, and then having an entire like life cycle going around with the state management related to that event. And now you put a form into a page, into a view, and you have 3 or 4 events firing for every click on a field or view for validation and
Right.
options and stuff. That is a huge amount of boilerplate for Redux. And as I found, way too much for what Redux needs to be doing. For a
For sure.
form only needs to maintain its state on itself. You don't have to change every single bit of state in the entire app because someone's messing with a form on one section. But I know why people are getting caught, because there is a really easy plugin or a package for Redux forms. I can't remember the name, but it's essentially this form builder that lets you easily create a form with validation, and you don't have to do any boilerplate. It's really easy to install, but it's tied to Redux. It's married to Redux. And I've tried to use it a couple times on just a proof of concept type of thing. I'm like, this is overkill. And then Abramoff comes out and says, yeah, you don't really need to use Redux entire app state management for a form. I would probably not use it for that. But I don't know that people get that little clip of Abramoff saying that. I think they still see Redux is great. At the beginning, it seems easy. Seems much easier than managing state at like drilling down props and stuff on a multi-level component. But then they get caught in that, whoa, we are now in the weeds. We're now in the forest. We're like full of trees of Redux boilerplate action creators and reducers. And we don't need it. We don't need all that.
Yeah.
I think it's
for sure.
I think it's like you talk about slippery slopes. I think it's just a big pothole in the middle of the road that people don't see coming. And it's, once you're in it, I don't know how you get out. But
well, and that's part of the problem with reacting to every change in React. Is you have to wait and let it, especially if you're changing an already in production application that is working fine. If you go in and you implement the newest thing in React, you haven't given it enough time to bake to make sure that 6 months from now, the community still feels the same way about that particular piece.
yes.
That's not, I'm not trying to say that the React team is being irresponsible with their releases, because I'm sure they test it what they're releasing. That's not the problem. It's more of a, does it meet what you need? Is there a body of work that says this is how we use this new React thing? So we'll use the hooks, for example. These are the best practices for hooks. There's simply no reason to change an application that's working to use the very newest thing without getting that body of work there first. Because there's a number of reasons. One, you don't know really the full potential of what that new feature will do. Two, the documentation and the examples, the people using it, the Stack Overflow and Stack Exchange posts about that newest feature aren't built. There's no body of work there to go back and look at. So your developers are having to go out and break new ground. Mm-hmm. We talked to Mark Thompson, and he was using a very new technology, and he was finding documentation to be lacking. And not necessarily just documentation, but also just real life examples.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you need to reach out and see how other people are using it. So I definitely am on the side of, that's cool. That may be something to look into, but we need to just chill on it for a little while and Let other people experiment with it. We don't have to be the ones to experiment.
True. Yeah. Well, you can experiment with proof of concept side things, but don't put it. But you don't need to put it into your, like, if your developers are itching to do new stuff, don't stop them. Just say, well, you need to prove to us this is worthwhile for our production app. So let them flex those muscles. It's kind of like an exercise in education and learning. If your developers are dying to do new things, give them the time to do it, but just don't do it in production. Do it on staging, do it on a branch, let them present on it. I mean, when I've talked to a lot of the companies, the most impressive companies I've spoken to embrace internal hackathons. They embrace there's people learning new things and spiking on things like that. Those are the best conversations I had with any prospective company I talked to, with the companies that embrace the idea that their developers are not working against productivity when they aren't just because they're not working on production. There is an attitude out there by some that developers must be working on a new production feature or maintenance in order to be productive for the company. And my argument would be, if your developers are learning new things and exploring, that is also a key benefit to keeping a happy team and an educated team. But you don't have to do all that in production. It doesn't necessarily fit. But I'm going to segue real abruptly to a different issue on React and this has to do with Node, the whole Node environment, I think. You use Django for Aspire EDU, and I use Rails.
Right.
And we use gems for our packaging and our plugins and libraries. I'm not sure. What does Django use again?
I don't remember the name of what the gem equipment.
It's not like a snake egg or some kind of pun.
Not that I'm aware of.
Like, I don't know. I just don't know. So I'll call them Python pods, and people can yell at me later, like, because I forget what they use. But when you add gem to your server, to your backend Rails app, there's no impact on the download necessarily for the user that's using your app, because they are making a request and getting a web page back. They're not getting the gem. But when you install packages with React, you are adding every package you add is increasing the size of the download necessary for the user to utilize the React app. And companies that need to grow at scale can't just add all like new packages and new libraries on the fly. Like, they have to think about, what is the size of the bundle that we are sending the user when they use our application? And in some way, React has done well by saying, we're not going to include everything in our core bundle, because we need people to be able to have, slim, lightweight downloads. But every time you add a new feature, Redux included, you are adding a big chunk of code to the download, to the bundle.
Right.
And then you get into the subjects of tree shaking, reducing, like lazy loading of packages, caching, that kind of thing, which is important. But what we were able to do in the server side dynamic languages of Rails and Django, and not worry about, hey, I'm going to add this package to handle PDF creation. Cool. And it doesn't take up that much memory or size on our server or dyno, so no big deal. But everything you add to your React app or Vue or Ember, any front side framework, has an impact on what the user experience will be and what the load on the browser will be. And it's a very significant thing to consider. So if you're chasing all this brand new stuff, you're going to have a pretty fat, heavyweight download at the end if you don't pay attention to those things. And I kind of got that sentiment when I was talking to some previous folks I worked with, and they were discussing the hooks. They're like, "Hey, are hooks worth it?" And one person piped up and said, they may be worth it, but we're worried. We're focused right now on getting crap out of our bundle that we don't need because all of our apps were too heavy when we started to really look at things at scale. And I don't know how much the React community talks about that, because efficiency is never the key goal of brand new stuff. And it seems like that's something that all people using a framework should be really paying attention to.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to that body of work thing. That's what it takes 6 months to figure out is how much impact on your performance are these new things generating, positive or negative. You're right that adding to the library size is one thing, but just seeing how it works out there in the real world is the other. Yeah, to answer the question, this is obvious to anybody who's pretty much had to install just about anything on Linux. For Python, it's a pip. It's called a package. But you use pip install. So that's the equivalent.
So yeah, like it's been interesting to me somewhat the adoption level of React across small, mid-size, and now big companies was rather impressive to me. Like, I just did not realize that this many big companies, which I don't really tend to work for and kind of go after, how many had bought into React. It's been very rapid. And I've heard people ask, why does Facebook do this? Why do they open source this stuff? And I'm like, because you're training their future engineers. Like every company that buys into React is training a potential engineer that can work on a Facebook code in the future. And I'm not trying to say that Facebook's going to poach everybody you got just because they know React. I'm just saying it's definitely advantageous for Facebook to be the stewards of a framework that the majority of the world is using, just as it's very valuable for Amazon to be the stewards of the most popular cloud-based service system for a huge amount of startups.
Right.
The data and the feedback and the ability to hire knowledgeable engineers for these companies that are, I mean, Amazon and Google and Facebook, they battle each other on a labor level that no one really looks at. They think, oh, it's all about selling more stuff or selling ads or selling user data. But when you go and look at the Amazon, the beast of we're like the road show of headquarter 2, that's all about employees, housing, finding, sourcing. So these companies are all fighting on getting the best talent available, and that's their kind of war front. And then you turn around and someone's like, well, this company makes all the hammers and screwdrivers. And that's the advantage that they get, because Facebook's not reselling a platform like Amazon, but they are selling and maintaining the tool sets that people are using. And that's a big deal. I've always thought that the one of the biggest failures of Apple was to not have created a React Native tool for development. Like they thought Swift and Objective-C were going to do it. And I feel like, whoa, you really went the wrong way there by not embracing a tool that could publish to multiple native environments. You basically are shutting yourself out from being the tool producer of choice for native apps. And that's why you're seeing progressive web apps move up. And what does that use? Largely, a lot of people use React and Vue and other front frameworks that will be in the future probably one of the main ways that people consume apps and app-like features will be through web-based technologies that Apple doesn't control. And that's just, I feel like they missed the boat on that. But, it's just one of those opinions, things you see.
Well, I find it interesting. What if React is like one of the most popular things over the past 2 years? What, I won't say language because it's not a language, but what technology for developers is even more popular over the past year?
What is more popular?
What is more popular?
Is this a question, or you have an opinion?
This is a question. It's a rhetorical question. I won't make you suffer too long. But what about VS Code?
Oh, totally.
Yeah, VS Code. How quickly did the landscape change in code editing from kind of a split universe to where everybody's like, I love Atom, I love Sublime, I love this, but VS Code's just better. And the reason I bring that up is Microsoft made VS Code. Yep. Facebook made React. You could go across those two are the most obvious examples of where a company has put in money and resources and it became the thing for developers. And you want to throw Amazon and AWS in there, I won't argue. That belongs there as well. Google to some degree does some of that, but their stuff doesn't seem to come across as popular. And that might be an interesting study to do as to why. But if you look at all the other open source projects that are out there that don't have a big company backing, it takes a lot longer to get that kind of momentum. And I don't know why that is. It's not like Facebook. I don't feel Facebook came out and said, made a huge marketing push with, Super Bowl commercials and everything like that to get everybody to use React. It just kind of happened. And because it had a Facebook stamp on it, that kind of legitimized it a little bit more.
I don't know. I think I disagree with they didn't do a commercial marketing push, but I think Facebook, my thought process is that Facebook knew they had, their back end started out as PHP, and then they bastardized it into their own custom proprietary code base. And now for scale, I'm sure they've got just a crap ton of different tools. So they couldn't really open source that. But the front end piece, I feel like from day one, they strategically knew there was a need. Like you saw all of these different tools, Backbone, Knockout, Ember. There was a definite need for a more robust single page app front end JavaScript framework that people could build scalable applications with using kind of the benefits of a community and conventions. And I feel like that was a strategy from day one, and I think it's done better than they ever hoped.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. But again, I think there was some marketing, within the developer community, but I don't think it was a hard sell.
No.
It was more of just a, hey, this exists. We think it works well. Why don't you try it? I remember, and I'm blanking on what podcast I was listening to, but I remember listening to a podcast before Abramoff joined Facebook, where he was talking about what he was doing with Redux.
Yeah.
So they saw it and they brought him in and they hired him, and then they released Redux. I think that was the order. Redux may have come out first and then they hired him. I don't quite remember the order. But I again, why? So let's take something like Django, Rails, things like that don't have. And I kind of even want to not use Rails as an example because it's kind of got a company backing too. But other open source projects like Django, like Drupal, and I will even say like WordPress, although WordPress kind of caught fire.
Yeah.
It takes those open source projects longer to ramp up. Is it the lack of a big company behind it legitimizing it? Is it that there actually is marketing going on? Why does it take non-company open source projects longer to ramp up is I guess the open-ended question that I don't know that there's an easy answer for.
Well, I mean, I think it's because of the cool factor.
Sure.
Popular wins.
Sure.
Like what is popular is never justified like by like going back to why are the cool kids in high school cool? Because as adults you look back, you're like, why did we all idolize that kid? You know, like not that there's anything wrong, but it never made sense. Like, what was about their personality or physical appearance that people gravitated towards it, and we were suckers for it in high school? Well, it's the same thing I think in tech of Facebook at the time. I don't know what they are now, but at the time, Facebook on the engineering side was cool. If Netflix was releasing products that the mainstream would use, Netflix does such a very focused type of thing, but people still like to look at how they engineer. Spotify is popular too, but none of that, like they haven't released things that the people at large have cared about because streaming video is not a core feature for everyone.
Right.
And streaming music is not a core feature for everyone.
Right.
But React is like the foundation level. And I feel that there's a popularity factor there that Facebook is able to do. And Basecamp was just on the fringe. So when they were supporting Rails, it was on the fringe. When was it? University of Kansas journalism department? Is that where Django started?
Correct.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's
like
something like that.
It
may have been a newspaper, if I remember right, in Kansas.
Yeah, and that, like, honestly, yeah. I haven't heard in Kansas City. I haven't heard a peep of Django related work.
That was going to be my next question. Is I wanted to head there real quick. Is you've been in Chicago many years. You moved to Kansas City, which isn't a suburb of Chicago, but isn't super far away either. It's within the sphere of influence. It's in the same area of the country. But I always felt like your view on Rails was informed and shaped by the fact that you lived in Chicago, and Chicago may be one of the top, one or two Rails hubs in the country.
Yes.
So I always felt like your view on that was informed by that. What did you see in looking at Kansas City? Because that will probably change my opinion.
The Rails people here largely feel like if they are a Rails developer here, I feel they feel somewhat isolated. There's not
Okay.
a ton of companies that are buying into it. And the companies that I've spoken to that chose Rails because of a developer that used to be on staff, their opinion tends to be like, we have trouble finding Rails devs here. We made a bet based on the Midwest, what was coming out of Chicago, but we never got the user base that we expected, or the development, the engineering um, group that we expected.
Did you get a feel for what is being used in Kansas City? You said you got no sniffs at Django. Based on what I've seen, I seem to see a lot of Python out there. But uh, did you get a feel for that, or just because of what your resume said, you were limited to what you saw?
Yeah, I don't hear much from Django folks, but when I look at job boards and I've looked at like the positions, nothing remotely comes up in Python in Kansas City. Like I just don't see it. I just don't see it talked about. So like when I look at New York, when I look at San Francisco, I see it mentioned all the time. But I don't it's been odd to me that the community, the Python community here, seems rather just not that big. When an hour away, I mean 40 minutes away, is where one of the biggest frameworks in Python came to be.
Right.
And I don't know how to explain it because I mean I've met the guy that started Django in Chicago. I think he lives in Amsterdam now, and I don't know. Obviously, a university didn't care about. Obviously, a university did not care that much about promoting open source framework. That just wasn't their big goal. I mean, the universities make money on and promoting getting a developer base around the code is just not their focus. So I don't know. It's only been a very short amount of time, but I just kind of want to ask out loud, and I haven't met anyone I can ask. What happened to Django being created about an hour away from here?
Yeah.
And I just haven't got an answer.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It was the Lawrence Journal World newspaper, so it was the Lawrence being where University of Kansas is, um, that where they created it, and that's an interesting parallel to Drupal. Drupal was created in Dries's dorm room
Yeah.
in Belgium. So very similar, and I don't know right off the top of my head. I don't know the origin of WordPress, um, but it's probably very similar. So anyway, that I thought it was interesting to get your perspective on how you felt the Rails impact changed once you got out of Chicago. So that's interesting as well.
Well, I can definitely say that I have had discussions with people about when I talk about Rails in my background, they ask me, what are your thoughts about Rails? Because we're not that into it anymore. And when I ask them why, it's not about Rails is old and doesn't do the job. It's we just can't find developers for it like we used to.
Right.
Everything's moved to this JavaScript world, Node, React, React Native, blah, blah, blah. And so people have asked me, is Rails dying? And I'm just like, no, it's not dying. It's really about the fact that the taste of development and engineering changes, and it may not be justified, but it happens. And the Rails folks don't necessarily care if they are the popular kids anymore. They
Right.
are getting stuff done.
It's maturing, like Java
Yeah.
matured, like some of your older languages matured to where demand and supply kind of equaled out. And when Rails was really hot, you had a lot of people learning Rails, so there was a good supply of Rails knowledge. But as the cool thing became JavaScript, or the newfangled things within JavaScript, because JavaScript's I believe older than Rails, the newfangled things in JavaScript, then that developer focus changed, right? If you'd gone to boot camps, 5-6 years ago, they would have been teaching Rails.
Yeah, they all did. That's
Yeah.
how they started. They all are getting away from it. Yeah.
You go now, what are they teaching? They're teaching JavaScript. They're teaching Node. They're teaching React. And if you do Node and React, you pretty much can do a lot of things. You can build.
Oh, you can do full.
Anything.
Yeah, you can do full stack. And now Python is catching fire on the data side, which, as it should. Nothing gives you a more robust set of tools than Python.
Sure.
In that respect,
I always liked R. When I was doing some study on data science, I preferred R to Python, but that was just me. So,
yeah. There's something else I was going to say about the stacks. I guess this is more of a CTO think discussion, but and maybe we've talked about this before, but keeping up with the stacks, as a manager, as a leader, trying to know and keep up with the different stacks available, I think can be a distraction. At the end of the day, if we're a leader in tech, or as we talk about on this old app, we're hands-on, heads down developers. Because you mentioned I'm a manager, or I switched into management for my career, but you've always been dabbling. You've been doing.
Oh yeah. That was for the 9 to 5. I gotta feed my family decision.
Yep. And at the end of the day, you're trying to solve a business problem, and technology looks like using some kind of technology is likely a way to solve that problem. And your responsibility is to ask, can we solve the problem with this framework or package, with this tool? Can we maintain it? And will I be able to find developers or do it myself over time, over the long haul? And if you built something with Angular or Ember or Knockout JS or Backbone, it may not be easy in every instance to find a developer for those, but it's not impossible. Fortran is next to impossible, but you can still find people learning that.
Sure.
You are not going, if you focus on having everything brand new, it's like trying to buy a brand new BMW every year. And like, maybe you can afford it, but do you need it? Like, that's kind of the question. Like, I thought the whole idea of a BMW is that it lasted over time. So I think my point I'm trying to make is you can make a bet on a good number of front-end frameworks that are still being maintained, they still have engineers learning new tools, that there's tutorials out there, there's conferences, there is a body of people working with it. And you're not going to, you don't need to constantly think that you're going to be obsolete because you decided to choose a framework. You're going to have to make a bet and then focus on solving the problem. Quit focusing on using every brand new shiny object that comes out around those things. That's kind of what I really wanted to say to people about all of this. Sure. And I can't say it in an interview, although I will. I'll part with this. If you tell me you're going to use MongoDB on your app and you can't explain to me why, I ain't working for you. No way in hell am I working for you. Like, you have to tell me why you chose it. And there's good reasons why you may use a document data store. But if you can't tell me why you chose it, then there's a big problem there, because that is, when you look at the tried and true data tools out there and you can't explain why you use one persistent source out of a persistent store versus another, and then I'm scared to death of what else you've chosen.
Right.
Because that's a big deal.
Well, they just needed your technical leadership to guide them through those decisions.
To say no? Is that what you meant? I mean, I'll still use it, but it's more of just know why you're choosing these tools. Don't do it because it's popular. Popular doesn't solve problems. Let's put it that way. So, anyway, rant over for now.
Well, very good. Thank you. I do think everybody needs to probably at least pay attention to what React's doing, because it is what's on fire at the moment. And
yep.
Just don't fall for every new thing that comes out. So,
just because React says the word hook doesn't mean you need to be. That's the parting word.
Very good. All right. See you soon.
Later.
Thanks for listening to This Old App. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at www.thisoldapp.online. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. For questions, comments, or things you would like to hear on future shows, please email us at hello@thisoldapp.online. Show music is Guns Blazing by Fab Claxton, licensed by Pond 5. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us soon.